Hello, George Wesley Cat here, aka Neko Vermilion, or Nico if you prefer. And my apologies for the glare of my light. It's the only light source I have in this room. Um, but anyways, this is going to be a video in regards to the subject of female characters within a video game. Hence why I have Phantasy Star on the screen here, which I downloaded onto my Wii before Nintendo stopped supporting online with the Wii. Now, I know I'm saying we, not Wii U, two different systems. Now, when it comes to the subject of female characters in video games, oftentimes, oftentimes there would be mention of old school characters like Samus of the Metroid series. This one being Super Metroid. I don't know where I put regular Metroid. Tomb Raider, which I've borrowed but never actually owned. And then there's Mirror's Edge, which I have, and Portal, which is on the orange box, which I should be returning to my brother whenever the hell he feels like taking it. But yes, when it comes to these games, these are the games that are oftentimes mentioned when it comes to female characters in video games, especially when it comes to female protagonists. Now, the thing is with me, I can be rather cynical when it comes to games with female protagonists, or playable female characters in general. And the reason for my cynicism is because I have in fact played a lot, and I do mean a lot of games with female characters, many of which where the female character is the protagonist, such as Phantasy Star here. And coincidentally enough, Phantasy Star, a woman also worked on this game as well, which is another thing I want to bring up. I want to go through the opening. I'm not going to read it through, but basically to put it, well, yeah. This is what they did in the era, released in the 80s. I'll just read it through real quick. Scum, do not sniff around in Lazarus' affairs. Learn this lesson well. Nero, what happened? Don't die. Alice, listen. Lazarus is leading our world to destruction. I tried to discover his plan, but I cannot do much by myself. I have heard of a man with great strength named Odin. Maybe the two of you can stop Lazarus. Alice, it's too late for me. Be strong. I will make sure that my brother died not in vain. Watch over and protect me, Nero. So, normally when it comes to old school first person, when it comes to games of that era, normally the common games that everyone knows is Dragon Quest, which goes by Dragon Warrior when it was released in the States, and Final Fantasy, which is in which you save the princess, and then it expands out from there. This one goes in a completely different direction, as you saw from its intro, which is that when it comes to the game, you're basically this woman who, as you see, is going out to avenge her brother, but expands out from there. And I know what some people would say, well, she's going to be getting help from men. Yeah, except for the fact that one male, which is a cat, she has. Well, I'm pretty sure the cat's female, considering what I've seen in Phantasy Star 4, but that's besides the point. But one of the males, I think it was Odin, that was mentioned, where you have to free him because he's been turned to stone. So there's a bit of some twist here that, although these days aren't impressive, back in the 80s, console RPGs never did what Phantasy Star did, you know? And even then, in the 80s, there were other games that were pretty much similar. There was a Psycho Soldier, in which Athena, girl with psychic powers, was saving her city. And then there was, I'm pretty sure it's an 80s game, I could be wrong, could be early 90s, a game called Time Gal, where a girl named, I keep forgetting if her name's Reiki or Reiko, but she basically has a time, as it states, she travels through time to solve stuff, solve problems. So I say, while many games go on to be greater, such as Fanstar still continues on to this day, Metroid still continues on to this day. Uh, Despite Psycho, there not being more Psycho Soldier games and more Time Cop games, Athena does make her appearances in the King of Fighters series, and the protagonist of Time Gal, well, basically that's her on the cover of Castle Shikigami 3. So thankfully, the people who created those games have not forgotten about such great characters. And that's where the subject of my discretion is. My, not discretion, my, I forgot the word for it, but basically I'm not very fond of the attitude towards female characters in video games. And the reason I say that, not just the women who work on games, but also the kind of female characters that people come up with in video games. My problem is that many games get forgotten or ignored. People act like, oh, those games don't exist. Obviously they exist! And it isn't just those. There's been more games where female characters were either just goes against the usual damsel in distress sort of thing and dead maternal figure and whatnot. For example, folklore. Ellen here is playable, and she goes out to different paranormal dimensions because she winds up getting a letter from her mother who's supposed to be dead. So there's that. Valkyria Chronicles, although it's male protagonist, you are basically in charge of an army, and basically a lot of the women in that game are integral to the game. And then there's Xenosaga. Protagonist is Shion, a woman who's a head engineer who's responsible for the robotics project that created the robot girl Cosmos here. And the relationship between Shion and Cosmos throughout the game is quite interesting. At times, Shion is more like an older sister, but then there are those times where Shion is more like an angry mother towards Cosmos. Let's see. Then there's not sure if it's pronounced Venetica, whatever, where she plays Death's daughter, avenging her dead fiance, and stuff like that. These are a lot of games that people oftentimes disregard, act like they don't exist. They're not there. I mean, even here, another one with one of my favorite female protagonists, Trails, Legend of Heroes: Trails in the Sky. Protagonist being Estelle Bright, who wind up having a rather interesting relationship with her adopted brother. Not to mention all the adventures that goes on and the stuff she does. What with her father raising her by himself, even though in some ways she kind of raised herself in a way. And then there's some of my personal favorites, like the Lost Kingdoms games. Now, I was gonna show a lot more. Oh, yeah, and then there's my other favorite, the Toho Project games, which is an import and just to show actual game disc. So it's not some random prop I assembled. I did in fact legitimately import a Japanese game. But that's the thing. You got a lot of these games that are awesome. And a lot of times people talk about games with female protagonists, they rarely bring them up. If anything, most people look at the gender ratio of kick-ass female characters compared to kick-ass male characters. Oftentimes the ratio matches the ratio on the orange box. And with orange box, you have, depending on how you look at the pyro, you have either 9 or 10 playable males, and then you have Chell of Portal. A lot of people look at that as the standard ratio for the the male to female ratio in regards to playable characters and gender. And the fact is that's not the case. Although I do feel like it is starting to become the case. And I know what some people are saying. How is that so? There's more games being released with female characters. No, there isn't. If there is, then I would be able to be finding far more from 2015 than I would be finding in 2013 or 2014 or even 2012. At least in those years, I can easily queue up at least 300 different games with female characters. And that doesn't include fan games that star female characters. Whereas with 2015, I can still queue up 300, but that includes fan games with female characters. You exclude the fan games with female characters, I could barely find, with great difficulty, I found 100. Great difficulty, I found 100. And clearly, I'm someone who can find these games no problem. Every game that I've showed are games that I've played. I've enjoyed. Some games, I admit, the character doesn't have as much depth to them as as desired. And I'm sorry, but I do throw Chell into that myth. But then again, a lot of people look at Chell as having a lot of depth, and that does come from more of a perspective thing. And you know, I do apologize for that remark because the fact is that a lot of this, when it comes to it, I am just talking in terms of perspective, and it is honestly very disappointing to me that 2015 had so little games with female protagonists, especially with how often people talk about it. But why there are people that think that there's more? That's easy because more mainstream developers, no, scratch that. More mainstream publishers are allowing games with female protagonists to be released. More mainstream publishers are allowing. The reason I say that is because it's harder to find these days, but there was an interview from the developers of Remember Me, which is another game with a female protagonist, and they said of how they had a hard time finding a publisher for their game. And honestly, you can't just release a game by yourself. You need stuff like licensing, and you have licensing fees and whatnot. You know, you go to work for a publisher, you go to have a publisher do that. You have to do what the publisher says because it's the publisher handling licensing fees, not the developer. Whereas if you're doing indie and self-publishing, then you're doing your own licensing and whatnot, which can get expensive. You know, such as the case with a lot of the games, really. And that's the thing. Like a lot of these older devs, they just faded away into obscurity. They don't release games anymore. I mean, there's still Toho Project games being made. Don't get me wrong, which is awesome. But then there's other games that just the companies just didn't do well because no one bought their games. Well, I can't say no one because obviously I bought, but yeah, they're not active anymore, so they're not involved anymore. But the developers that are under major publishers are. And while that's great and all, the fact is that we do have less games with female protagonists being made. And this is the thing that bothers me. The fact that the older games don't get respect, those developers went out of business, and the new games, yeah. Well, that's my ramblings and whatnot. Whatever thoughts you have, please share, and I'll likely make a follow-up video to this if I see it proper. So, I am George the Cat, aka Neko Vermillion, Nico if you prefer, and thank you for watching.